Hello and welcome to this David Icke DotConnector videocast. Well, I've got some facts and then I've got some questions in relation to the taking down this week of the Russian plane off the coast of Syria amid the latest, one of apparently hundreds of Israeli attacks on Syrian targets, in which the Syrian defense system, reacting to the Israeli attacks, accidentally took out the Russian plane with a loss of 15 people. So here's some facts. Israel is a tiny country with a population of around 8 million, and a quarter of that is mainly Arabic. So the population of Israel is less than that of the city of London. In terms of land size, Israel is about the same as New Jersey, which is 47th in size of the 50 US states. The number of Jewish people overall in the world, if you take a mean figure, is about 16 million in a global population of about 7.5 billion. And a large number of that 16 million not only do not support the actions and the direction of the Netanyahu government in Israel, but vehemently oppose it. So there's some facts. Now some questions. Why then, in the light of what I've just described, does tiny Israel have so much influence in the world in terms of other governments? And why is it so protected, and increasingly so, from any criticism? Why is it that the United States vetoes any criticism of Israel or condemnation of Israel, no matter what it does, in the UN Security Council? And just look at the videos that I put with this videocast involving former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney and another long-time American politician, Gus Savage, and see what they had to say from their experience of the Israeli lobby in American politics. Some more questions. Why is it that Israel, this tiny country, gets something like $3.8 billion a year from the United States? And that's just a headline figure. Add all the rest in, it will be much higher. Why is that? A country of 8 million people, quarter of them Arabic. And what about Israel's nuclear weapons program? Why does Israel and the United States, and basically the Western bloody world, have this agreement that Israel won't talk about its nuclear weapons arsenal, and the United States, no matter what the president is, Democrat or Republican, won't ask? While the same duo, the United States and Israel, point the finger at people like Iran, who don't even have nuclear weapons, about what a nuclear danger they are to the world. Why is it, on the same subject, that Israel has so much influence over the administration in the United States that, as a recording, which Netanyahu didn't realize was recording, has shown, he is claiming, and I don't doubt it, that it was Israel that basically brought about Trump's deletion, scrapping of the nuclear deal with Iran, which has now thrown all that into turmoil exactly as planned. Why is it that in the face of blatant international law to the contrary, that Israel goes on quicker and more than ever before now since Trump got in, because they own him, are building more and more Jewish-only settlements, but it's not racist, in the occupied lands of Palestine, in the West Bank, etc. Where is the international response? Why can't the international so-called community do anything about that? When Israel just says, up yours, darling, we do what we like. And by the way, on that subject, here's an extraordinary Israel government response. In a court case where their right to legislate in the occupied lands of Palestine was being challenged, this, take a deep breath, was the Israeli government's response. The Knesset, Israeli parliament of course, has no limitation which prevents it from legislating extraterritorially anywhere in the world, including the area it calls Judea and Samaria. The Knesset can legislate concerning any place in the world. It is entitled to violate the sovereignty of foreign countries through legislation that would be applied to events occurring in their territories. It is within the authority of the government of Israel to annex any territory. The Knesset may ignore directives of international law in any area it pleases. Despite all these, it says, the plaintiffs seek to define a rule by which precisely in Judea and Samaria the Knesset is prohibited from legislating anything, and that precisely there and nowhere else in the world is it subject to the directives of international law. So there you have it from the horse's mouth, if you like. International law does not apply to Israel, a country of 8 million people, about the size of New Jersey, as it applies to, or should do, to everyone else. Now, if any other country said that, what would the response be? That's tyrannical. That's racism. Response to this from the Western world? Nothing. Why is it that Israel has the power over the American administration to especially since Trump, before, yes, but now, and then some, to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, with all the implications that has for Palestinian rights and a Palestinian homeland. Why is Israel being allowed to basically ethnically cleanse East Jerusalem of Palestinians more and more and more and more? Why? Because Israel does what it likes, and it has the plan, it's had all along, to replace the mosque, the big mosque in Jerusalem, with a rebuilt Solomon's temple. Is it just a coincidence? Some more questions. That Trump's biggest funder in his election campaign was Sheldon Adelson, an American-Israeli billionaire, or that his senior advisor is Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who's overseeing the Palestinian-Israeli situation when he is a lifelong friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, who was a friend of his father. Is it a coincidence that ultra-Zionists like David Friedman are now US ambassador to Israel and oversaw the movement of the embassy? Or that another Trump employee like Friedman, a guy called Jason Greenblatt, is the international negotiator for Trump, including the negotiations of the Israeli-Palestinian situation? Is it also a coincidence that another ultra-Zionist called Steve Mnuchin, his Treasury Secretary, moving to that position from the always to be trusted Goldman Sachs? Why is it that tiny Israel and its Netanyahu government has so much influence over the governments of Britain and France and Germany and others? Why is that? Which brings me to the question of the week. Why has the response from Vladimir Putin been so weak, at least so far, in relation to what the Russian Defense Ministry and the Russian military described as Israel's fundamental and central part in the loss of 15 Russian servicemen on the plane shot down by accident when Syria was defending its land from the Israeli attacks? The difference between what the Russian military has said and Putin's response, I give the rider so far, we'll see, has been remarkably different. This was the first response before Putin got involved. You are to blame for downing of Russian plane and death of its crew, Russia tells Israel. Russia has formally complained to Israel about its air raid on Monday, which led to the downing of a Russian reconnaissance plane off the Syrian coast. Moscow has laid the blame for the crew's deaths squarely on the Israeli side. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu spoke to his Israeli counterpart, Avigdor Lieberman, nice man, on the phone about the downing of the Russian plane. He relayed Moscow's position on the incident, blaming the Israeli military for setting up the Russian plane to be shot down by Syrian air defenses, which were responding to an Israeli air raid, an official statement from the Russian military said. The defense ministry reiterated that Israel failed to notify Russia of the impending attack in a way that would have given its military an opportunity to move the plane out of harm's way. Instead, the warning came just 1 minute before an Israeli F-16 fighter jet, actually more than one, launched their attack. But here's the question. What the heck is happening when Russia is there to protect Syria from terrorism, as they have very well up to this point, and yet they have an agreement with Israel that Israel just tells them when they want to go and bomb Syria, it's just that it was a bit late this time. What's going on? What is it about this tiny country that gives them carte blanche to go and bomb another country, like I say, hundreds of times by now, apparently, just whenever they want? And Russia just says, oh yeah, well, tell us when you're going to do it. What? Anyway, the defense ministry said immediately after the attack, the blame for the downing of the Russian plane and the deaths of its crew members lies squarely on the Israeli side. The actions of the Israeli military were not in keeping with the spirit of the Russia-Israeli partnership, so we reserve the right to respond. Well, we'll see. Earlier, the Russian Defense Ministry said the Israeli jets had used the bigger Russian plane as cover during their attack on targets in Syria. The ministry said the Israelis must have known that they were putting the Russian plane at risk, but neither changed their battle plan nor gave a warning in time for the plane to be moved to a safe area. Now, what the Russian Defense Ministry is saying here is absolutely outrageous. That Israel used a Russian plane coming into land at a Russian airbase as cover to attack a country that Russia says and has up to this point defended, except from Israel, from terrorism. And yet, where is the response? Israel, of course, this is the law with Israel, okay? Always applies on everything. They never do anything wrong, no matter outrageous. Oh, they can shoot the legs off kids at a distance with sniper fire when the kids are inside a fence, often a long way from it. That's not a problem. And they've done nothing wrong. And they can be involved in the downing of a Russian plane. Nothing to do with us. So they're blaming, oh God. The Israeli Defense Forces said the mission was to destroy arms manufacturing equipment, which they claim was delivered to Lebanon on behalf of Iran. Israel insisted that the responsibility for the Russian deaths was not on Israel. It never is. But on Syria and its allies, Iran and Hezbollah. Yeah. Heard it all so many times before. Now, what Putin said was very different shortly after all that came out from the Russian ministry. Putin on Israel's role in downing Russian plane, quote, looks accidental like chain of tragic circumstances. The downing of the Russian plane looks like a chain of tragic circumstances, Vladimir Putin said in response to a reporter's question on whether it could be compared to Turkey's downing of a Russian military jet in 2015. When people are dying, especially under such circumstances, it's always a tragedy, President Putin said during a press conference. Responding to a reporter's question on whether the incident in Latakia could be compared to the downing of the plane by Turkey, Putin said the two situations were different. Ankara deliberately downed the Russian jet, he explained, while the Russian plane this time looks like a chain of tragic circumstances because the Israeli plane didn't shoot down our jet. And there are increasingly, so I gather, people in Russia who are starting to question why, if they didn't before, there is such a weak response to what the Russian military said happened. In fact, here's a Russian military general, a former one, urging Moscow to shoot down Israeli fighter jets. Former head of the main Department of International Military Cooperation of the Russian Defense Ministry, General Leonid Ivashov, called on Moscow to target any Israeli fighter jet which violates Syrian airspace. Well, you would have thought that would have been a gimme all along. Why is this tiny country just allowed to fire missiles at Syrian targets whenever it likes? Moscow should expel the Israeli ambassador to Russia and shoot down the Israeli fighter jets in case of entering the Syrian airspace, the former general said. He's now the president of the Academy of Geopolitical Issues of Russia. And he also asked Moscow to decrease the level of cooperation with Israel and halt issuing visas for Israeli nationals. Will Putin do any of that in the light of what happened to the plane? We'll see. No sign of it yet. There's also the story, of course, and I've not seen much response to that either, that the Russian defense system picked up missiles being fired from a French frigate off the Syrian coast in the same period that all this was going on. Now, I understand why we have the leader of Russia reticent to respond militarily, although it would be nice for a greater even verbal response. And the reticence can be explained, at least in one way, by the fact that he will know that there's a powder keg there. And Israel is a completely literal loose cannon in cohorts with the United States, which is desperate for some conflict there, because the plan all along is to remove Assad and balkanize Syria into basically ethnic groups to just reduce its power. So I can understand, you've got to play it steady here because we don't want a conflict. But one thing that can be learned from experience is that appeasing bullies doesn't work, because the bullies just demand more and get more extreme. I mean, what we've seen in terms of the abuse of the British opposition Labour Party and its leader Jeremy Corbyn to pressure them into accepting a ludicrously far too broad definition of anti-Semitism, shows that if you give a bit and you give a bit, they just want more and they just want more and they just want more until they get everything they want. It was a bloody disgrace that the Labour Party caved into that, but they did. And so if these actions are not met with a much more powerful response, then they're just going to go on and get more extreme. And what happened to the Labour Party in terms of being pressured and pressured and pressured, not least by the pathetic lapdog media in Britain, to accept this outrageously broad definition of anti-Semitism, is that at the same time that Israel's actions in cohorts with America are getting more and more extreme, so they're getting their censorship in early, because where we are now is not where it's going if we allow this to go on. And so we're seeing this increasing pressure to censor under the weaponization of anti-Semitism any criticism of this extremist government in Israel. And it's being done by basically labeling anyone who criticizes Israel as an anti-Semite. And it's not just happening in Britain in terms of the Labour Party, it's happening all over the place. Because Israel has an extraordinarily vast network for its size of organizations working as one web that work in different countries to target those who are either criticizing Israel or supporting the cause of the Palestinians. And these organizations are ultimately answering to Israel and answering to the Israel embassy in the particular country. And some of them are obvious by the names they call themselves, and a lot of them are not obvious at all. They're given names that would give no idea of what the goal really is, but ultimately they're organizations controlled out of Israel that are targeting freedom of speech in country after country after country. Now, these are not suppositions, these are facts. And I know we live in a post-fact world, but some of us refuse to. And this week, see an example in America. Trump administration moves to curb campus criticism of Israel. You do surprise me. In a move to chill speech critical of Israel, a former Israel lobbyist is now the Trump administration top civil rights enforcer and has said that the Department of Education will apply standards that conflate criticism of Israel and Zionism with anti-Jewish bigotry. Classic sums it all up. They say, oh no, these definitions, they're not for criticism of Israel. And then anyone criticism of Israel, they say, oh look, you're an anti-Semite under this definition. So now we have what says former Israel lobbyist. Are you kidding? Former. Who's now, on behalf of the government, targeting criticism of Israel in American academia and among students. Did I mention there's 16 million Jewish people in the world in a population of 7.5 billion? And that large numbers of that 16 million do not support the actions of the Netanyahu regime? The announcement was made without public or congressional notification or debate, and reportedly took current and former investigators in the Education Department by surprise. Not that it would matter if they did put it to Congress. Mentioned earlier, a congressman called Gus Savage, the video that I put with this videocast. If you watch his presentation in the House of Representatives of his experience of being pressured by the Israeli lobby, just have a look when the wide shot comes at how many people are sitting there in the chamber listening. Answer? Nobody. That's the power of this network coming out of Israel, which is vastly funded, limitless money. Keith Marcus, who was recently confirmed to lead the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, reopened a dismissed complaint against Rutgers University by the Zionist Organization of America. While leveling charges of anti-Semitism against supporters of Palestinian rights, the Zionist Organization of America has openly aligned itself with unabashed anti-Semites and white supremacists, said former Trump aides Steve Bannon former Trump aides Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka. On 27 August, a letter obtained by the New York Times revealed that Marcus had notified the Zionist Organization of America that he would be using the State Department definition of anti-Semitism to define Judaism as an ethnic origin rather than just a religion, in order to charge Palestinian rights activists with ethnic discrimination. This is what's going on to silence criticism of this tiny country, its government and its military. In effect, the New York Times stated, Arab American activists say the government is declaring the Palestinian cause anti-Semitic. Exactly the plan, and that's what's going on in Britain and elsewhere. Now, this guy Marcus, here's some background. The Trump official wants students prosecuted for Israel protests. The Trump administration's top civil rights enforcer at the US Department of Education wanted students who did nothing but hold a noisy protest in support of Palestinian rights to be criminally prosecuted. Keith Marcus was captured on camera during a September 2016 meeting with an undercover reporter working for the Al Jazeera documentary that was exposing the influence of the Israeli lobby in America, and that documentary was then banned by the government of Qatar that funds Al Jazeera on the say-so of Israel and America. Marcus was director of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights under law, an Israel lobby group unaffiliated with Brandeis University. The Brandeis Center specializes in something called lawfare. This is what happens in Britain as well. Lawfare, the use of legal proceedings to harass and silence Israel's critics. In that role, Marcus spearheaded the Israel lobby strategy of filing complaints to the Department of Education under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, claiming that universities fail to protect Jewish students by not cracking down on Palestinian solidarity activism. And in June, as I've said, Marcus was confirmed as the director of the Office for Civil Rights at the US Department of Education. Sure, he'll be unbiased, and this means he's now in charge of investigating alleged violations of the civil rights law. He has quickly fulfilled the worst fears of civil liberties defenders by reopening a bogus complaint against Rutgers University made by the Zionist Organization of America. And this is what is going on all over, in country after country, to silence criticism or questioning of the behavior of the Israeli government. But it goes deeper and gets even more sinister. Now, new software monitors anti-Semitic posts. A new system was introduced by the Israeli Diaspora Affairs Ministry that monitors anti-Semitic posts on social media and alerts companies that they need to be removed. They also say they'll alert the police and intelligence agencies as well. The anti-Semitism cyber monitoring system is capable of detecting posts and tweets that reek of anti-Semitism on the basis of whatever they encode in, and is able to determine the area in which they originated from and the reach of that post or tweet. From today, every anti-Semite online should know he is exposed, the hatred he spreads is being watched, and he will be held responsible, Diaspora Affairs Minister Naftali Bennett told reporters at a press conference. Naftali Bennett lecturing people on racism is like an alcoholic lecturing people on drinking too much. It's extraordinary. But look at that. Here we have a country of 8 million people, a quarter of them overwhelmingly Arabic, in a world of 16 million Jewish people, large numbers of whom do not support the Israeli regime. And yet there is now a cyber monitoring center, command center, looking at all these posts that people have, and then alerting the authorities. 1984, crikey, doesn't even begin to cut it. So why is it that this tiny country has that much power and influence? %79% of right-wingers in Israel believe Jews are the chosen people. Are you for real? Asks Gideon Levy, who is a superb Israeli journalist who has the decency to look at the world from the wider perspective. What would happen if any other group called themselves the chosen people and were above all others? What would people call that? I think you'll find it in the dictionary under R. Whereas belief in God is a private matter, the belief in a chosen people provides the outlines of policy that explains a great deal about Israel's actions, says this article by Gideon Levy. When they say that they are the chosen people, it reveals their psychosis. I would like to meet representatives of that absolute, decisive, arrogant and patronizing majority reflected in a recent Haaretz poll and ask them, are you guys for real? How did you come up with that? On whose say-so? Are you the absolute majority, so sure we are chosen, the very best, that we are the champions, head and shoulders above the rest? How did you come to this conclusion? Levy asks. I'd like to ask you, dear majority, on what basis are you convinced that we are the chosen people, that we know everything better than all other nations, that we deserve more than everyone else, that what applies to them does not apply to us because we are superior? This is how a majority of Israeli Jews responded to the Haaretz dialogue poll published last week, We are a chosen people. A majority, 56%, are sure of this. The figure rises to 79%, an overwhelming majority, among self-identified right-wingers. In a country where 76% of people believe in God or another higher power, perhaps that is obvious. But whereas belief in God is a private matter, the belief in a chosen people provides the outlines of policy that explains a great deal about Israel's action. I ask the question again. What would be said about anyone else that claimed to be the chosen people? But that which claims to be chosen above all others, and there are a lot of people, as you see there, Jewish people who don't believe that. But for those who do, they're the ones that are screaming racism at everyone else. And, you know, we can take this shit and be intimidated into silence about it and allow this tiny government of this tiny country to do what the bloody hell it likes without question, without criticism. And if we do, then we have not seen anything yet. And we should be asking the question, as many Jewish people are asking, what is it about this tiny country with its tiny population that leads it to have so much influence in world events and in governments around the world, not least the United States? These are legitimate questions. They are not saying it's a massive Jewish plot and everyone who's Jewish is involved in it. Load of rubbish. It's asking why the government of Israel and a significant number of inner circle ultra-Zionists have so much influence in ways I've described. These are legitimate questions based not on supposition, but on provable fact. And the people of this world have every right to ask those questions and every right to know the answers.